We are very pleased to be introducing very important targets that will guide our work in housing through 2025. We all know that housing is a citywide challenge that requires citywide solutions. In order to alleviate the challenges residents are facing today and to keep up with continued growth in the future, we need to build 36,000 new homes by 2025. And that's what our Housing Equity Report and updated comprehensive plan are going to help us do. Both of these documents are focused on how we're using housing to build more equitable neighborhoods. And here's the urgency and the reasons we have to act now. 48,000 households in our city pay more than 50% of their income on housing. 48,000. On top of that, we're rapidly losing our naturally occurring affordable housing, and the affordable housing we do have left is not equally distributed across our city. Because of that, neither is opportunity. Like in cities across the nation, what we see in D.C., especially in housing, are the long-lasting impacts of policies that were created to disadvantage specific populations, especially African Americans. Some of those impacts are dire. For example, the life expectancy of a resident living in Ward 8 is 15 years shorter than a resident of Ward 3. Only by better managing access to opportunity can we change that. Our city will continue to change, and we can be sure of that. The role of the comprehensive plan is to manage that change so that we are always moving toward a fairer and more inclusive Washington, D.C. And so with that, I am pleased to be here, with our Office on Planning, who is shepherding this process and has been for the last several years. You're going to hear in a second from the Director of the Office of Planning, Andrew Trueblood. Get Andrew a big round of applause. And I, of course, want to acknowledge and thank our housing team, our DMPED, our Department of Planning and Economic Development, represented today by a number of our great folks, including John Falchicchio, the interim Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development. Thank you, John. And our Housing and Community Development Director, Polly Donaldson. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and let Andrew get to the targets.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. Thank you for your bold vision and leadership on these housing efforts. You have shown that our most pressing challenges affect everyone in the city and require citywide solutions, with each neighborhood and every resident playing a part in addressing them. I'd also like to thank the tireless efforts of the staff of Office of Planning, who have been working incredibly hard on these initiatives over the last few years, and especially the last few months to get us to today's milestone. Also the staff of the Department of Housing and Community Development, as well as Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, as well as the directors and deputy mayors that the mayor mentioned, as well as for the comp plan, a whole host of other agencies and directors and deputy mayors who I will not list, but really was a team effort to get us here. Finally, I want to thank Electricity Bikes for hosting us. What a cool space this is, right? I mean, wow. I think a great example of a local retailer here on Wisconsin Avenue, as well as a great example of trying to do more sustainable, trying to support us with our sustainability goals, sustainable transportation. So thank you for hosting us. I think today is a great day to kick off Mayor Bowser's Housing Week because we're delivering on an important commitment that the mayor made at her second inaugural address. At that event last January, the mayor promised to take the crucial steps needed to address housing affordability in the district. She set a bold goal, as she just mentioned, of 36,000 new housing units in the city by 2025, with 12,000 units affordable to low-income residents. And to do that, she recognized that we needed new approaches to our challenges. She is making important strides towards that vision with two releases today. First, we are excited to share a report that is a collaboration between the Office of Planning and the Department of Housing and Community Development on housing growth and equity that looks at how we achieve the mayor's bold housing goals across the district. And Malika, if we could just hit the, oh, they got it, here we go. Sorry. The mayor has made clear that, as with addressing homelessness, which required the construction of short-term family housing in every ward, addressing the root of housing affordability will require every part of the district to play its role in housing and affordable housing production. Second, and critically needed to address our housing needs, we are releasing for public review draft proposals for the remaining 24 elements and 2 maps of DC's comprehensive plan. This will set the long-term direction of the district on a trajectory that can deliver greater equity and is a critical step towards achieving our housing needs. Both documents we are releasing today start with a key DC value that we have heard throughout our numerous engagements over the last few years, and especially were highlighted to us by residents in our most recent DC to Me engagement. We heard loud and clear that one of the most important values to residents is equity. And while that is a frequently used term, what we mean by equity is that we seek to ensure that a Washingtonian's race or zip code will no longer drive their housing, health, economic, or educational outcomes. We also mean that future generations will have the opportunity to thrive as we do. Housing and equity are critically interrelated. As the mayor noted, housing has a direct bearing on health, economic prosperity, education, transportation, and culture. Successful housing approaches can bolster positive outcomes across these important dimensions of our experience as residents, which is one reason we are excited to discuss both the housing report and our proposal for the remaining portions of the comp plan today. Mayor Bowser, through her bold goals, recognizes that in addition to continuing to do more with our many existing affordable housing programs, it is critical that we take a step back and assess the district's overall housing market. In May, she signed a mayor's order directing a number of DC agencies, including the Office of Planning, to look across the spectrum of our housing efforts to help determine how we can address the broader forces shaping our housing so that every resident today has a place in the future of the district. OP and DHCD are approaching this challenging task one step at a time. Already, thanks to the mayor's leadership, we have worked with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments to set a 2030 goal of 320,000 housing units across the region. That's an increase of 75,000 housing units over the previous projections. The mayor's leadership at the National League of Cities has resulted in renewed efforts to call on the federal government to address its critical role in housing, especially through sufficient funding of public housing. So from the national to the regional to district-wide efforts, our next task was to continue to zoom in and look directly within the district. Today, we present the mayor's housing targets broken down by planning areas to make sure that we have an equitable distribution of housing and affordable housing and to help direct our policies and funding. Before jumping into our analysis, it is worth a quick note about how we are looking at affordable housing. Through our engagements, we heard many residents raise concern about what we mean when we talk about affordable housing and who it is for. For this analysis, affordable housing means units that are available with both a capped rent based on income levels and a restriction to household based on their income. This review focuses on housing available to low-income households, which the federal government defines as below 80% of the median family income. In the DC area, it's just under $100,000 for a family of 4. It is worth noting, though, that most of the units that we've seen produced are affordable to families of 4 making less than $65,000 a year. Rent control is not considered an affordable housing policy because rents are not tied to a person's ability to afford them. That is, these units are not required to be rented to those who most need housing and could very well be occupied by higher income households. Additionally, both the housing report and the comp plan note that the continued loss of naturally occurring affordable housing, which is privately owned housing affordable to low and moderate incomes residents based on market-based rents, given current trends, we can now foresee the loss of this critical type of housing as rents increase and housing is redeveloped. It is therefore critical to have a laser focus not only on the production of new subsidized and income-restricted units to make up for the loss of these units, but also on the conversion of existing unrestricted housing into affordable housing. While the report focuses on new affordable housing construction and opportunities, it does note the importance of the mayor's housing preservation strategy that is being implemented at DHCD, especially in communities with existing affordable housing. It also notes the importance of the DC Housing Authority's efforts to address the needs of our public housing. For this report, we first analyzed the existing distribution of affordable housing. We recognize that this distribution of housing, which is also a distribution of opportunity, is not the result just of natural forces beyond our control. It is not just the result of implicit bias or de facto acts of individuals and governments. Rather, it is the result of over a century of racially discriminatory policies designed to segregate our city. While we have inherited the unjust results of these systematically discriminatory policies, by examining recent housing and development trends, we have found that they continue to have an inequitable impact on our low-income residents and especially people of color. In order to help guide how best to address this history, the mayor asked us to listen to DC residents. So we shared this map and conducted a survey and outreach at events throughout the summer. We heard from nearly 3,000 residents, including the mayor herself. We heard a resounding view shared by 3 and 4 residents that the existing geographic distribution of affordable housing is inequitable. This was a belief shared by the vast majority of residents in every ward, hovering around 80% in most wards. And most residents believe that we should be focusing our new affordable housing opportunities in those high opportunity areas that lack it today. So we started with the goal of reaching an equitable distribution of affordable housing in the district by 2050, which is a goal proposed in the comp plan. We then worked backwards from that and forwards from today's pipeline to create a 2025 goal. The numbers are shown here and align with additional affordable housing in areas today that have an inequitable supply of housing and that align with preservation for residents in areas with more existing affordable housing. In some areas, we are well on the way towards reaching this goal through our existing pipeline. In others, we need to increase the amount of affordable housing by an order of magnitude. It will take a concerted effort, not only by policymakers, but also residents, businesses, and other stakeholders to dismantle the continued impact of our racially discriminatory history of land use and housing development. Today marks our first effort to identify it and set a tangible goal towards a more just district for us and for future generations. Through our numerous engagements this summer and fall, we learned that housing, affordable housing, and housing affordability mean very different things to different residents. While our discussions were often about rent, they were also about how to maintain a house among siblings when a parent passes, or how a senior can age in her community. To some residents, it was about living in a well-maintained unit that is free of lead and mold. And yet other residents talked about how their housing challenges were less about the unit they lived in and more about being close to transit, jobs, a grocery store, or their longtime community. So while policymaking necessarily focuses first and foremost on housing costs, we recognize that our homes are also expressions of who we are. We understand that housing is not just units or measuring rent, as our homes are also incredibly personal and individual, not only on the inside, but also in terms of the places we live. For many residents, the block, neighborhood, ward, or city they live in is in itself an individual expression. So with these housing production goals now set, our next step will involve refining this analysis to look at what type of housing we need and where, and how to reach targeted populations, such as seniors and families earning less than 30% of the median family income, and to better understand individual residents' experience with housing. We will be making recommendations and policy changes to make sure we reach our goals. Given the importance of housing, we know that we cannot wait to begin taking action, which is why today the mayor is releasing for public review her proposal of the comp plan, which is a critical step for reaching our housing goals. I'd like to start with a little video, if it works. There we go. We are excited to share Mayor Bowser's proposal for the DC Comprehensive Plan, a long-term, high-level vision guiding the future of the District of Columbia through the lens of our physical change. It's an opportunity for us to envision a positive future, not only for us, but for our children and grandchildren. This proposal is the result not only of the work of the DC Office of Planning and many other DC government agencies, but also the collaboration with many residents, businesses, stakeholders, and officials. The comp plan will help us think about how we work towards better housing outcomes, a more equitable and resilient city, and leveraging public resources for a bright future. So I'd like to just take a moment. We're going to walk through these, but I really want to take a moment to thank those stakeholders I see sprinkled throughout the room who have been with us in this journey over the last 3 years, who've provided input, who've come to our meetings and our outreach. I think the input you have provided has been incredibly helpful, and it really is something that makes this proposal something that we can all be proud of. While there are 25 elements or chapters in the comp plan, the foundational framework element was introduced to Council in January of 2018 and passed last Tuesday. Yeah. Woo. The framework element helps set the definitions, guiding principles, and context for the rest of the plan. So its approval by Council has really been critical for us to move forward. The discussion around the framework, as well as our summer engagements on DC values, helped OP update our efforts around issues that residents and council members would like the remainder of the comp plan to address as part of this proposal. The remaining elements, as you can see up here, are divided into citywide elements like housing, arts and culture, and transportation, and 10 area elements. In addition to these elements, also called chapters, we have 2 critical maps, the generalized policy map and the future land use map, which I'll get to in a second. We have heard from over 15,000 residents and stakeholders through this process and are excited to share the mayor's draft proposal today. In addition, we incorporated over 40 plans and updated numerous data and policies. As the video mentioned, a draft proposal has 4 major themes that I want to share with you, centered around housing, equity, resilience, and public resources. So first, let's start with housing.
Now that I live in Van Ness, because I work in Tinleytown, I'm closer to work, I have greater access to public transportation, and there's a grocery store within 2 blocks of my apartment. The new comp plan proposal will allow for more affordable housing throughout the city and a greater distribution of it, so that we all have easier access to affordable housing.
As mentioned earlier, housing is a critical element of the comp plan, and its proposed policies support the mayor's housing goals that we just talked about around production and equity, and also address concerns around preservation of affordable housing, as well as incorporate our Homeward DC plan to address homelessness and make it rare, brief, and non-recurring. Equity is another important theme of the update.
I'm a family medicine physician at Unity Healthcare in Columbia Heights, which is a dynamic neighborhood where different communities and cultures intersect. I see patients of all ages, and often it is difficult to take care of their health because there are many social and community factors that are impacting their health that are out of my control. The comprehensive plan creates an environment of equity where all DC residents can achieve their optimal health. The plan focuses on the relationship of food and health, and understanding that in order to have healthy communities, we need programs that increase access for everyone to healthy foods.
As shown here, we propose a new equity crosswalk that links to all the various actions and policies related to equity. But we also we add some important elements around the social determinants of health and food policy. Similarly, we have a proposal. The proposal recognizes and addresses increased vulnerabilities to natural and man-made disasters and chronic stressors and sudden shocks through a resilience crosswalk that highlights the comp plan's broad approach to the issue. We also include in the generalized policy map an updated resilience planning area. Finally, we address public resources.
My whole family uses the Capitol View Library. We use it for story times, for grad study, just coming to check out and borrow books. It's a great place. The comp plan proposal emphasizes the importance of public resources and amenities in places, priority on investment in high-quality public facilities like libraries and community centers, where families in all parts of the city can learn and play.
While these 4 major themes are truly knit throughout the plan, they are also evident in our proposal for our new maps. The generalized policy map adds areas of resilience focus, like I said, future planning areas, and the boundaries of the state of Washington Douglas Commonwealth. And I think that's the next. There you go. That's the generalized policy map. Next is the future land use map, incorporates a number of small area plans and includes additional opportunities for more housing in transit-rich areas, including those identified in the Housing Equity Report. While the FLUM, as we call it, has land use designations, it is critical to note that it is not zoning. Once land use changes are approved in the FLUM enacted by council, there are additional processes that landowners must go through with the Zoning Commission in order to modify the zoning that they have today. These processes involve both public feedback and a more granular analysis of the site and impacts. One of the most important ways to do this is through our planned unit development process, which we are strongly encouraging in order to create more affordable housing opportunities and ensure community input. There you go. Today marks the official public release of the mayor's draft proposal with public review through December 20th, 2019. OP is focusing on ANC feedback and engagement and has already provided 2 workshops for ANCs. We will continue providing technical support through January and are sharing a how-to guide released today. We are providing ANCs with 108 days to review through January 31st, 2020 to provide their official feedback. OP will also host open houses in each ward to share our proposals and talk to residents and provide opportunities to engage with their ANCs. One thing we heard loudly and clearly with the framework is that this document is very technical and not always accessible to a broad audience. For this reason, we have created a suite of one-page documents, including a how-to guide for both residents and ANCs, an explanation of the comp plan, a summary of the major themes, and summaries of every element. All this can be found at our updated comp plan website, Plan.dc.gov. And here we even have a guide on, if you have a few minutes, what you might want to look at. If you have a little bit more time, and if time isn't an issue for you, you can read all 1,600 pages. After ANC comments are received, we will work on the legislative package and seek to introduce the mayor's final proposal to the council in the spring, with the goal that the council approves the comp plan prior to the end of their session in December 2020. Doing so is critical to fully addressing the district's most pressing needs, especially affordable housing. I'd once again like to thank the mayor, the deputy mayor, staff of OP, DHCD, and DEMPED and others to help us reach this momentous day. So thank you for all your work. Can I just give the staff an applause? Thank you, guys. And we are now available, I think the mayor, Director Donaldson, and I are available to answer questions that the press might have.
Stand here? That's a
Be happy to.
for me. Okay, yeah, let's stand here. Is that okay, guys? We could just stand here. Okay. Andrew? Questions? Press first, please. Press questions? Yes, sir.
So where we're standing now is actually a place where a developer proposed, I think, an 8-story building once, and the neighborhood really, at least some neighbors really opposed it. How do you plan to overcome that neighborhood resistance to development?
So I think what we talk about in the future land use map as well as the comp plan is starting with high-level values and principles. So I think you'll see throughout is the idea that where we look at additional potential land use density, especially for housing, we look at areas close to transit and along transit corridors. And so you'll see that throughout is there are opportunities for us to create more, especially housing density throughout. I think the best practices are not only more density there, but also considering the neighborhood it's in. So making sure that the density is the appropriate type. And we have a number of proposals to address that throughout. The critical idea here too, as tied to the first part, is finding housing opportunities across the city, especially in places where maybe the housing has not been produced in the past. And so we found there are opportunities to do that.
And I think it's really important. What I've found in all of the successful development projects that we have gone through the city, when there's a plan in the beginning and people buy into that plan, it makes specific projects that come up easier to deal with. And we think our value and our need as a city to produce more affordable housing units across the city is embedded in the report that we've just issued and also the comprehensive plan that we will advance for approval next year. Press questions, yes.
For the mayor, please. If you look at the story that went up this morning on the Washington Post website, if you look at the comments.
I never read comments.
Yeah, well,
on the Washington Post. I don't know why, comprehensive plan comments are one thing. But just kidding. What's your question?
If you look at the comments, some of them are really nasty, and they're basically saying we don't want, low-income people in our neighborhoods. I mean, really pretty offensive in many cases. And I'm just wondering, what's your overall strategy for overcoming that? In some of these well-off neighborhoods, how are you going to overcome political opposition, NIMBY opposition, if you will, to low, more low-income people coming into neighborhoods and, as the NIMBYs say, changing the character of the neighborhood?
Well, what we know is that in all of our conversations across the city is that people are concerned about housing affordability. They are concerned about preserving a city that is diverse, and that people of all incomes can afford to live in the city. Well, it follows that we have to have a place to have housing where people of all incomes can afford to live. That follows, correct? And so what our job is to make sure we have a plan to get there. It's not enough to say that we need 36,000 units with no plan to get there. So what we've done is we've looked across the city at what the state of things are and what can be absorbed in each of our planning areas. And those are our targets. And so that gives us a roadmap to deal with projects as they come along. It's reflected in our comprehensive plan, and they will be dealt with, questions and concerns will be dealt with project by project. But I think what you heard Director Trueblood say is in a very inclusive process and talking to residents in all 8 wards across the city in each of the 10 planning areas, people said that equity and having DC residents of all backgrounds have access and access to great transportation, access to great amenities is our DC value, our #1 DC value going into this process. So will it be easy? Will there be tough conversations? For sure. But will we have a fairer and more just city at the end? For sure. Yes.
Director Trueblood mentioned the importance of the planned unit development process. A lot of developers have stopped filing PUDs because of the increase in litigation, projects being stuck in the courts. How does this plan aim to address that?
Well, we have been working for the last several years on addressing ambiguities that the courts pointed out in some decisions. Quite frankly, some processes that held up thousands of units that we needed to get moving online over the last several years. And part of the benefit of having moved and having the framework approved now is we think that many of those ambiguities have been addressed. So I'm going to ask Andrew to talk a little bit more specifically about what our proposal and the framework, the approved framework, say about our planned unit development process.
Thank you, Mayor. As the Mayor mentioned, the framework element was a really critical document for the Council to approve in order to address some of the ambiguities. As the Mayor mentioned, we've also been working with the Zoning Commission to make sure that their notices and their actions follow the guidance of the court. So I think those are really big, important things that have happened. I would say with the remainder of the comp plan, the other 24 elements and 2 maps, there are 2 things. One, we did have a look at it for contradictory language. I think with any big vision, you might have contradictions, and this isn't meant to resolve every one of them in every case. It's meant to outline what our goals and what they are broadly. In many cases, they are then resolved in the planning level or at a project level. But we did look for for explicit inconsistencies or vague language. The other piece that I know that I know various stakeholders are interested in is the future land use map. That was, I think the court had a specific view on what could happen there. The framework element addressed it a little bit, but I think having clarity on what land use designations are is really important, and that will also help with clarity moving forward.
Hey, Andrew spoke a little bit to how the changes in the comprehensive plan might make those lawsuits, perhaps less successful. But all of the feedback that I've heard is that, the lawsuits may still well be happening. They just might not be successful with the changes you made to the comprehensive plan. So, Mayor, I'm curious whether you would support, perhaps more substantial legal changes to the standing for challengers to BUD projects moving forward to prevent the challenges from moving ahead in the first place.
Well, let me say this. First of all, I'm discouraging any developer that has the opportunity to build more units so that we can have more affordable housing to be scared away from the process. And we will use every tool at our disposal to discourage that. We don't want to see any more buildings going up that could house DC residents that have been scared away, largely by people who aren't directly affected by the project. So that's how we're going to proceed. We need these units. These units have been held up for too long, and we can't continue to hear residents across our entire city be concerned about affordability without doing everything that we can to get more units.
Mayor Bowser, so I have two questions. One, going back to a couple of earlier questions, what specifically do you say to residents who, yes, there should be more diversity, there should be more affordable housing, but not in my backyard? What specifically do you say to those residents? And then my second question is, how do you get the developers to buy in? How much is this going to cost? And what incentives do you have to get the developers to buy into this up here as well?
Well, I've been involved in development projects in D.C. since I was an ANC commissioner in 2004. And largely what I have relied on and what I've encouraged our entire team to rely on is to engage with the community early and often. And I also think having a plan, whether it be a small area plan or elements of the comprehensive plan, that the community buys in even before there is a project proposed is so important because these plans outline our broad values as a city and it has buy-in from communities, ANC commissioners, from the council, and in the bigger projects, especially where they're planned unit developments, there's another layer of community input at the zoning commission. And so it's important for us, it's my responsibility to respond to the critical needs, some say crisis level needs for housing in our city, and to make sure that we have a plan to get there. And that is what we are here to discuss today. And what I see largely from DC residents is when they understand the purpose, they have had the ability to weigh in, and they have had the ability in many cases to affect change, to make projects more palatable to their neighborhood and their needs. Everybody might not be 100% in agreement, but they know they've been heard and that projects are everybody's collective best efforts to serve not just the needs of the community, but the greater needs of the city.
And then the cost, how you incentivize developers to buy in?
Well, we continue to look at our toolbox, Mark. And we have some powerful tools from the zoning things that have been described in the planned unit development process to our housing production trust fund, to our housing preservation fund, which is critical that we continue to fund. And I should note that we've been joined by our council member for housing, Councilmember Anita Devons. Thank you. Who has been a champion for our housing preservation efforts, which will continue to be important in the budget moving forward. It's also important that we continue to look at our workforce housing and make sure that we have ways to incentivize workforce housing in the city, that we continue to invest in our homeless services system to prevent people from going into the homeless services system, but also to make sure we have affordable units at their exit from emergencies. One more, is that a press question? Okay, let me just finish with the press questions. Yes, press question.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm with City Paper. I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit, either of you, to how the comp plan and the plan released today also relate to the public housing recapitalization plan that's under review and the fair housing plan that's being developed. There's a lot of plans, and I'm sort of trying to sort them.
Sure, thanks.
Maybe I'll start broadly, and I'll let you, Director, talk about the fair housing plan. So this plan is very much focused on where the new affordable housing opportunities will be. As I mentioned it in my remarks, we recognize there's a critical importance around housing preservation, where there's existing affordable housing, as well as public housing. Each of those really have their own efforts, have their own plans and their own analysis that are a part of that. So this is really looking forward, looking into 2025. How do we create those new opportunities? So it's focused on production and opportunity creation.
Exactly. And then also because we are committed to implementing the Fair Housing Act and having the broadest fair housing policies and having that integrated into the plan, we are now conducting what's called the analysis of impediments to fair housing in order to update and make sure that we are in sync with our comprehensive plan on ensuring equal opportunity for housing across the District of Columbia. So this is woven into very much the principles of the Housing Equity Plan and the Comprehensive Plan.
So I just want to get a sense, just a rough estimate, order of magnitude of how much more it's going to cost to get the 12,000 units by 2025. I mean, the report talks about, the tools in the toolbox you were saying, talks about financial subsidies, more money on vouchers. I mean, what's the order of magnitude for how much this is going to cost? You've got more than $100 million a year in the Housing Production Trust Fund. Are you going to have to double that? I mean, what are we talking about here?
I think what we have found with both on the affordable side, but even on the overall housing production side, is it's an ambitious goal, but it's not impossible. So for housing, we think it's about 15% more that we need, 15% more housing produced each year. And so I would say on the affordable housing side, the mayor has already done an incredible job over the last 4 years, 5 years almost, of investing in affordable housing. I think those investments will be critical to continue, and there may need to be additional resources. But I think we're way ahead of what other cities are doing in terms of this. And
you are well ahead of what other cities are doing. But in terms of what you're trying to do here by 2025, are you talking about 15% more each year in the Housing Production Trust Fund? Is that what we're talking about?
So when I say 15%, that's overall housing production. I think we are right now working and sharpening our pencils on budgetary proposals as well as on land use. One thing that's critical that I mentioned, the future land use map, is that is a critical need for us to be able to produce some of this housing, because that is a great way for us to create inclusionary zoning units, for example, or planned unit developments. So that's another way to create this housing that's not necessarily a direct budget hit, but can help us create housing, especially in high opportunity areas.
And I will say also that what hand in hand with this is the prioritization of our resources, so that funding decisions and project approvals and in our competitive bid processes, putting in criteria that address and sync in with the comprehensive plan and with the values embedded in the housing equity plan.
Just one follow-up. We'll know basically when you propose the next fiscal year's budget how much more this is going to cost. Is that basically what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, I got 2 questions. One of the early reactions that I was hearing to the original housing targets is where's housing going to go in Mid-City and near Northwest, where there's already dense development? Where do you envision seeing that kind of growth?
Thank you. That's a good question, and I think that the answer is actually true across the city. One answer is something we heard from Urban Land Institute when they came this summer. They used a term called gentle density. I think when people hear density, they oftentimes think 11-story buildings, especially in DC, where that's kind of what you see in some of our new developments. But you can have 5 or 6-story buildings in some of these neighborhoods. And in fact, you do. Some of the most vibrant neighborhoods in the city, in Shaw or Capitol Hill, you have a mix of different types of housing. And so that's very much part of what we're going to be looking at and helping and talking to residents about is what are these opportunities for that type of gentle density. Another opportunity, both where we are now but across the city, is to find those naturally occurring, as we call them, naturally occurring affordable housing opportunities, those apartment buildings usually that may not have rent restrictions, but there might be opportunities to use our funding to help maybe rehab them and then put rent restrictions and income restrictions on them and make sure they're really targeted to the residents who are there now, or if it's empty, future residents.
And then can someone describe just the overall big changes to the comprehensive plan and what that means for residents. I mean, I was trying to just quickly look on my phone, but I saw a lot of buzzwords, but I don't really know what the big takeaway should be and what it's going to mean for residents.
Yeah, okay, so I'll just take a step back and say the comprehensive plan, this is the plan that was, it was envisioned in 2004 under a vision for growing an inclusive city and passed in 2006. There was a small update in 2011, and we are now doing what is probably what we would call a major update. The city is very different than it was in 2004, 2006. Growth is a part of what we have, but it isn't. It's also thinking about how we ensure equitable growth and how we make sure every resident gets to partake in the growth in the city. And I think that is the high-level theme of this update, is thinking about, okay, we need to continue growing. We will be continuing to grow. Much of that growth is actually families being family formation and new Washingtonians in the city. So what are the things we need to do to make sure that we can continue to be a vibrant city for them? And for many residents who feel like maybe the future doesn't hold an opportunity for them or their children. So that's the high level. The high level value and vision, I think, of this update. We listed a whole host of kind of specific updates, and actually every element has then even more updates, and we can kind of delve in to each of them. There's a lot here, but I think it all wraps up and wraps back to that bigger vision.
I have a question here. Mayor Bowser, in your introduction, you referred to the life expectancy gap, particularly east of the river, and then said the solution was to greater opportunities. Yet, we know that income inequality in D.C. is, compared to the 50 states, is the highest, and compared to major cities, it's one of the highest. And we know from extensive research that income inequality and, of course, wealth inequality drives bad outcomes, including bad health. Can we tap into an opportunity which we did not do for the 2019 budget? That is, recovering at least a good part of the big tax cut that wealthy residents are getting. In 2020, those making over $350,000 will be getting roughly $400 million tax cut. And by increasing their income tax rate, we can recover a lot of revenue and have a dedicated stream for public housing repair. We can really probably wipe out homelessness and have a major impact on reducing child poverty, which is really shockingly high. So it's a long question. Can't we at least recover the big Trump tax cut that wealthy residents are getting, and they'll end up paying less than they did before? So it's a long question. Sorry for that.
Thank you, Professor. We are not going to take the budget questions today, but there will be ample opportunity before I submit my budget to the council for that input. There was a community question here. Yes, sir. If you could just tell us who you are. Do we have a microphone? There we go. Coming to you.
Thank you. I have one comment and then one question.
Okay.
My comment is on the very first question of this press conference, which was addressed to the project from 2016, which was proposed for this site. And the implication of that question was that that project did not come forth because of opposition from the neighborhood. It is true that the neighborhood opposed, but that's not why the project wasn't built. The project wasn't built because at some point the Office of Planning withdrew support for that project, which we were happy about, but it wasn't because of us, it was because of the Office of Planning. And so that question really ought to be addressed to the Office of Planning. They can explain why they withdrew support from it. From our primary objective and our objections were the size and density of the project. We support planned unit developments. Implicit in a lot of questions here is that we don't. That's not true. We support inclusionary zoning. What we don't support, and which we didn't support in this project, was a planned unit development, including inclusionary zoning, with a map change on top of that which produces high-rise, 100-feet buildings. That we do oppose. My question has to do with affordable housing. Again, directly and indirectly in a lot of questions, people think that this community does not support affordable housing. Can you tell us why you believe that?
We don't believe that. What we believe, though, is that individual projects, all taken together, if they're all opposed or they all don't go through, we have the result that we have in the previous map, where we have very, very few units that would meet that affordable housing number. And so that's why I think it's important for us to look at what could happen, to set a target, and to make sure we're all working towards that target. Because individual project by individual project will lead to less than optimal numbers of units available. And so that's what we're here to do today, to look at what could happen, to make sure that the comprehensive plan can support it, to make sure all of the avenues for community input into this plan, but also into individual projects is robust and available. And I know when we do that, we will get to an optimal number of units.
Thank you. Well, I'd like you not to leave Ward 3 with the impression that everyone was against a development here. I'm actually sadly disappointed, except I actually come to this bike shop, so it's great. But that we don't have a supermarket here. And so I was hopeful, because I think a lot of people alluded to this notion, for you to perhaps be a little bit more instructive on, specific to this location and perhaps north to Tenleytown, what exactly are you proposing within your toolbox to make it so that this is going to be a location that's more amenable to better transit access, to a better building, to better housing and the like? You've talked a lot at the higher levels, but maybe you can focus really on this specific site and how it would be improved.
Well, I think that we are intentionally talking on a high level because we're not getting ahead of our planning, the comprehensive plan approval, or proposals that could be forthcoming based on what the improved comprehensive plan will allow. So that's by intention, but I think on the smaller scale meetings and around more specific proposals, we will be more specific. Yes.
Good afternoon, Ms. Mayor. So my name is Akash Thakkar, and I'm a Ward 3 resident. And so I have a sort of a comment and a question. My comment is that I think, Mayor, and as you've heard from many folks in the room, there are many, many folks in Ward 3 that are supportive of a different and more diverse vision. And so I'm a resident, I've got 2 young kids, and I'd love to see in my ward more socioeconomic diversity, more age diversity. And the good news is when you see those things and housing that provides for all folks, you also get better retail. There's a notion that rooftops drive retail, and I'd love to see good retail. When I was young, lived in 16th Street Heights, these are the corridors we'd come to eat. Now everyone goes to 14th Street, and unfortunately sometimes I go to Bethesda, and it pains me as a DC resident. So I want to share.
Me too.
I mean, it really does. And so I think I want to be clear that there are many, many folks like me in the neighborhood who very much want to see gentle density, as Andrew put it, but included in that affordable housing and retail amenities. So that's the comment. And as it relates to sites like this one, there were many folks in my neighborhood who wanted to see maybe even a larger project. And we can debate that another day, but a larger project than what was proposed could include even more affordable housing that was on the table. So that's how the two are linked. So my question is, I think there are a number of folks who want to see good, positive, gentle change. How can we be helpful in making some of the stuff that's on the boards more of a reality?
Well, I thank you for that, and I want to continue to suggest that communities review, and I appreciate Andrew laying out the 5-minute version, the 2-hour version, and the lifetime version of going through these documents. I want to call attention to the A&C commissioners and invite commissions to pass resolutions and comment on those plans by January 31st. So please do that. And I would like everybody to participate in those discussions and talk to your commissioners. Also engage your council members, both your ward council members and your at-large council members, on what you find important about how we move forward. And let me just say this. We are talking about something that can be tough, right, in neighborhoods. But that's not to say that we think, to your question, that this neighborhood's good and this one's bad, or this one's for us and this one's against us. That's not what we're here to talk about. But we are here to outline how we can engage in a constructive conversation towards a higher goal for the city. And that's my job, right? I wouldn't be doing my job if I ran away from the discussion because it was hard, or because this one development didn't go the way that some people wanted for us to get more units. The way to deal with that is to have a better plan moving forward. And this is not a way to attack one group of people over the other, because that's not what we're here to do. One thing I know for sure is that people, just by our own nature, we're focused on our neck of the woods, our block, our family, our this, our that. And that's why you hired us, to look at the total needs of the city and how we can work together to get there. Okay, we'll take one last question. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Being that the current affordable housing pipeline in far northeast and far southeast already greatly exceeds the goals for those planning areas, do the current plans include any efforts to encourage additional market rate housing production in those areas, or to steer affordable housing planned for those areas into other areas of the city in order to achieve a greater balance?
I'm going to ask Andrew and Polly to address that question.
Thank you. As I mentioned, when we did the outreach around the distribution of housing, we heard that every part of the city has housing needs. I know we've been focusing on the production of affordable housing and housing in certain parts of the city, but we recognize that every part of the city has its housing needs and opportunities. And so in some areas, it might be less about production and more about preservation of existing subsidized housing. It might be, in some cases, about low-income home ownership opportunities. We didn't even mention the work that the mayor has done to fund and DHCD has done to implement the housing production, the HPAP, or Home Purchase Assistance Program. Thanks to Councilmember Bonds for supporting that as well. So the point is, there are different tools needed, and our goal is to say, we have a big goal, we have district-wide goal, we have district-wide funding, but then how do we sharpen our tools for each part of the city?
And exactly following from what Andrew said, our decisions, our work, the work of the DHCD team going forward is to take these general principles and values and put them into action with the resources that we have. And it's looking at equity and resources through that equity lens that's really going to be key. I think preservation of existing affordable housing, which we have a strategy and the resources now to do, is something that will be very important in future projects in neighborhoods across the district.
All right, thank you, everybody. I'll do off topic when we close, and Andrew and Polly and their teams are here to answer any additional questions. And once again, let's give a big hand to our host for inviting us. Thank you, Electric City Bikes. And while you're here, you might want to buy a bike. All right, have a good one, everybody.